Welcome to the Tending Our Nets podcast, where we believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We encourage everyone to learn more. We work to equip believers to share their faith with everyone they know.
Welcome to the Tending Our Nets podcast. My name is Joshua Sherman, and I am your host here. What I want to do this episode is look back a bit at this series that we've been doing on the big picture gospel. This is essentially taking the gospel more from the full story of Scripture, from creation, from the fall, to what God has been doing and is doing and will do to bring about the renewal of all of creation and the salvation of all who believe in Him. We've been looking back at that as a way of seeing just how big and expansive and beautiful the gospel is. So I just want to look at a few things and just kind of ask you questions about how that has maybe changed your view or helped you to think a little bit more deeply about the gospel, whether you are a Christian or whether you're not. So we started with the bad news. We looked at the human condition, the fact that we live in a world that is broken, the fact that we live in a world where we see or look around us and what we see, what we live, is a world of mortality and scarcity, a world of conflict, a world of dominance hierarchies, a world of generally male dominance. That's not how God designed it originally to be, but that's what happens when people rebel against God and don't want to submit themselves to Him. And the reason for that is not just because God has come up with a set of arbitrary rules for what is good and bad, what is good and evil, but we talked about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that Adam and Eve ate from, and recognizing that this is actually experiential knowledge, not just head knowledge, and that this is knowledge about not just what's good and evil the way we think of good and evil, but tov and ra, which in Hebrew is a bit more like what is good and whole and brings about wholeness, what brings about shalom, what brings about justice, versus what brings about decay and calamity. So really big picture, it's not just about making choices that, God is looking up there as like this disapproving father and saying, well, you made the wrong choice, I guess you're going to have to pay. No, actually what it is that when we act outside of the way that God designed things, that brings problems, because God designed a world that was perfect, that had kind of perfect harmony and balance and justice. And He said it was very good when He created the world and then put people in it. So we saw sin. This is how we hurt ourselves, how we hurt other people, that this is missing the mark, and that what that means is actually looking back at when God created a mankind in His image, when He created Adam and Eve in His image, when He created all of us, right? Because we are all descended, right? In His image, He was saying, I want to have people whose identity and role is to represent me on earth. That brings value, and that is a beautiful thing. But we fall short of that, and we don't represent God well all the time. And so we miss the mark, and that is how we fall short of the glory of God. We talked about the fact that there's natural evil in the world, that things are broken. There are hurricanes and earthquakes and mass tragedies that go beyond just looking at human sinfulness, and so we'll need to explore that a little bit more. We talked about the fact that that may be the bad news, but the good news is that God didn't create things this way, that He created creation good. He created mankind, man and woman. He said it was very good. We're created in His image, as we just talked about. And we talked about the fact that there's good news that God isn't leaving things this way, that God is working to renew all things and to bring about the salvation of people who believe. We talked about the fact that the biblical story is thus essentially like a sandwich or a chiasm, where you have creation and new creation as the outside parts, and then inside you have fall and restoration. We have wickedness and holiness. We have confusion and clarity. With the cross, Jesus' death and resurrection. We see this story of God constantly working towards the end goal, the reason He created things in the first place, to have a global Eden with people as part of His royal family. And we see that although there is brokenness and sin and corruption that enters in, that God works to reverse that. We talked about the fact that we see this in Abraham, that God actually preached the gospel to Abraham, not specifically about Jesus Christ and him crucified, but simply saying that through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And the way that Paul sees this in Galatians, he says that God was basically telling Abraham that even the Gentiles would be included in God's family by faith. We looked a little bit at the big story of the Bible in focus, looking at Babel and the brokenness and scattering and confusion that happened there, and the rebellion that happened there, and the way God reversed it with Pentecost. The fact that God set that all up through the exile, that wasn't just punishment, but actually preparing the way for the gospel to be spread to all the world. That is what we've gone through over the last number of episodes. And I just want to take a few moments now and ask you to think about how that differs from the Romans Road approach to the gospel. Do you see how much more just big and beautiful and expansive that is? Do you see how that includes not just individuals, but the renewal of all creation? How does that compare? How does that inspire you? Does it help you, as either a Christian or a non-Christian, to understand the gospel, to see how much more compelling it is when we place the gospel of Jesus Christ, the condensed version we see in churches and on the street about him crucified and resurrected, within the context of that larger story of redemption? I think it does. I would love for people to reflect on that, comment on that, see, if there's anything else that's big picture that you see, please bring attention to that. I may add some things to this further. Next time, we're going to be moving on to a new series, and this series will be about the gospel of God's victory, the gospel of God's kingship. So I look forward to getting into that with you as we explore more and more about the gospel of Jesus Christ. Please like, subscribe, write reviews, all the things that you can on YouTube and your podcast apps to really get the word out so that we can help Christians better be equipped to share the gospel with everyone they know. God bless.
You've been listening to the Tending Our Nets podcast. If you like what you hear, check us out at the Raven Creek Social Club and by searching for us on social media via Tending Our Nets.
Raise us up to bear your